last session, we left Moses and the Israelites camped just a few miles from the Promised Land, paralyzed by their fear. And as the Israelites refused to enter the land, afraid that they could not overcome the enemies there, the people who dwelt there, God said to them, "Because you didn't trust that I would deliver the land into your hands, not one of you who are over the age of 20 will enter the Promised Land." And so for 38 years they remained camped there, or somewhere in that vicinity, until finally that generation died out. And Moses, now 120 years old, with his brother Aaron and Miriam, lead the children of Israel. They pass through the kingdoms, or in between the kingdoms of Moab and Edom, and they make their way north on the King's Highway. They begin to journey on this ancient trade route, and as they head north, I'm reminded that today you can still travel on the King's Highway. The current highways follow the ancient trade routes. And so today you can drive on the King's Highway. They journeyed together as a people along the King's Highway. As they did, they passed through some beautiful terrain in Jordan. You can still pass through many of these places to this day. And we are in the Gilead Mountains. We are overlooking, and I just wanted you to see this, we're overlooking what had been the ancient kingdom of Amorites here in the foreground. And in the far distance, you can see the ancient kingdom of the Ammonites. And the king of the Amorites came out and waged war against the Israelites, and they utterly destroyed them. And this became a part of the area of Israel on the east side of the Jordan River. As you look, of course, you see a great deal of barren wilderness, but you also see more and more greenery through here. And down in the valley, you can see the olive trees, and you can see the crops that are growing down here. And so having been in the barren wilderness for 40 years, coming here, this begins to look like a land flowing with milk and honey. There's obviously water, there's trees, there's crops that are growing. And finally they camp on the east side of the Jordan River, opposite the city of Jericho. And it's from this place that Moses will speak his final words to the Israelites, the book of Deuteronomy. So the setting for the book of Deuteronomy is Moses has led the children of Israel finally to the edge of the Promised Land. And before they enter the Promised Land, he gives his final words to them. The entire book of Deuteronomy is Moses giving once more a reminder of what God had done to deliver the children of Israel, a reminder of God's commandments, a reminder of the travails they'd been through and the moments that they had been disobedient, warnings to them that if they forget God and if they turn away from his path, God's protection and care won't be upon them anymore, and encouragement for them to love God and to be obedient to God's commands. So you can sense Moses is 120 years old, and there's an urgency in his voice. He knows he's going to die before he enters the Promised Land. He's going to set Joshua up to be his successor in leading the children of Israel. But he feels a great sense of urgency. I'm leaving. I'm not going to be with you anymore, and I don't want you to forget these things. Please don't forget these things. So over and over and over again in Deuteronomy, he says the same thing. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget that God has delivered you. And love the Lord your God with all your heart and keep his commands. Now I want you to picture behind me the Israelites, hundreds of thousands of Israelites, perhaps millions if we take literally the numbers in the Torah. And you've got them behind Moses, and Moses stands on a high place and he begins to preach to them and to share with them the words of Deuteronomy. I want you to listen to the most important words in the book of Deuteronomy. They're found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And Moses says, "These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that your children and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all the decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you." And then here it is. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them upon your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your doorframes of your houses and on your gates." And then over and over again he says, "Be sure to keep the commands of the Lord your God and the stipulations and decrees that he has given you. Do what is right and good in the Lord's sight, so that it may go well with you. And in the future, when you're settled in the land, do not forget." You get towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and Moses says this. He says, "See, I lay before you blessings and curses, life and death. Choose life, that it may go well with you in the land." And what does it mean to choose life? Don't forget God. Don't forget the one who delivered you. Don't forget how He has saved you. Don't forget that He's chosen you as His own people. Don't forget the promises that He's made to you. Don't forget His commandments. Love Him and be faithful to His commandments, and you will live in the land. God called Moses to meet Him on the mountaintop once more, this time Mount Nebo. Pilgrims who follow in Moses' footsteps today end their journey at Mount Nebo. We drove by van all the way up the winding roads to the top of Mount Nebo, and there you can find a church that's been built, a modern church, built on the ruins of ancient churches that had come long before it. And from this site, pilgrims remember Moses' final moments. They remember God's graciousness and mercy to Moses in showing him the entire promised land, and they reflect upon his life. And so after Moses gave his final commandments to the children of Israel, God called him to ascend once more to the mountain to meet Him. This time not Mount Sinai, but to ascend Mount Nebo. And as Moses ascended Mount Nebo, 120 years old, he came to the mountaintop by himself. And God spoke to him and allowed Moses to see the promised land. The scripture says that God allowed him to see all of the Holy Land, which means that God somehow supernaturally allowed Moses to see all the way to the area of Galilee, to the Mediterranean Sea, south to the Negev. God wanted Moses to be blessed by seeing these things before he passed. And then this is what we read in Deuteronomy chapter 34, the end of Moses' story. Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. God buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak nor his strength gone, and the Israelites grieved for Moses. And then these final verses. Since then, no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And so we come to the end of our study of the life of Moses and the Exodus. And my hope and prayer in preparing this study and taking you to Egypt and to Jordan was that you might see the scriptures with fresh eyes in new ways, that we might together learn more about the life of Moses and see in him an example for our own lives. A man who was not perfect, who struggled, who experienced disappointment and heartache, a man who knew opposition and pain, a man who had known fear and anxiety, and yet who offered himself to God and who faithfully sought to love God and to obey His commandments, who had a vision of the promised land and refused to give up on that vision. And that we, in studying Moses' life, might become more faithful followers of God ourselves, and that we might never forget God, that we might obey His commandments and seek to love Him with all of our heart, now and for the rest of our days. That's my prayer for you. Amen.